So back in 2022, regulators actually handed down this massive fine to a major German enterprise.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one.
Right. And the crazy thing is, it wasn't for a catastrophic data breach. It wasn't for selling customer data to third-party brokers. The company was penalized because their chief information security officer was just, well, they were basically doing their job too well.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. They had appointed their CISO to also serve as their data protection officer.
And I mean, to an outside observer, that seems like a totally logical consolidation of security roles, right? Like, you put the person locking down the servers in charge of compliance.
Exactly. It sounds incredibly efficient. But beneath the surface, that dual appointment triggered this massive legal tripwire under the GDPR.
Yeah, it exposed a fundamental structural conflict of interest, and it's one that is currently just tearing through executive boardrooms across the globe.
We have this absolute alphabet soup in the C-suite right now. You get the CIO, CTO, CPO, DPO, CDO, and now the CIIO.
It's a lot of C's.
Right. And they are all engaged in an all-out turf war over the most valuable, volatile asset on the planet, which is data.
Because the rules of engagement for enterprise data are being rewritten in real time. I mean, we've completely crossed the threshold. Data is no longer just a byproduct of doing business. Data is the business.
Yeah.
The machine learning models trained on that data are the primary engines of corporate growth now. And the executives managing that pipeline are finding out that their mandates are in direct, almost hostile opposition to one another.
And that structural tension is exactly what we are decoding in our deep dive today. We're going to look at why these roles naturally and legally collide and how the most resilient organizations are architecting a way out of the chaos.
Because you have to find a way out.
You do. So we're going to explore how they are building these really specific 6-month blueprints to govern the absolute wild west of artificial intelligence, but doing it without stifling innovation.
Which is a tough needle to thread.
Totally. And to do that, we are drawing from an immense stack of primary sources today. We have incredibly detailed case studies from Fortune partners. We've got architectural frameworks from the AI Governance Institute, and deeply granular research on cloud transformation from PwC UK.
And we're also layering in strategic models from Forbes, Splunk, Kiteworks, Reco AI, Ethisphere, and the DPO Center.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It's a vast landscape of research. But,
Yeah.
every single source points to the exact same underlying friction. How do you reconcile the business demand for infinite agility with the existential requirement for lockdown security and regulatory compliance?
Right. But before we dive into the mechanics of that friction, I do want to give a massive shout out to the sponsors who make this level of deep synthesized research possible.
Absolutely.
Because the threat landscape and the regulatory environment are shifting so rapidly, like keeping up is literally a full-time job.
Yeah, it's impossible to do alone.
Exactly. And that is why we rely so heavily on resources like CISOmarketplace.com and ComplianceHub.wiki. They provide the kind of real-time, actionable intelligence that makes a deep dive like this a reality.
I mean, those platforms are just indispensable for navigating the modern governance maze.
They really are. So if you're listening right now, whether you're a mid-level manager trying to pitch a new AI agent to your executive sponsor, or if you're an engineer wondering why IT suddenly blacklisted your favorite SaaS environment, understanding this C-suite dynamic is your ultimate secret weapon.
It gives you the leverage you need.
Yes. If you know who holds the operational keys and you understand the specific legal terrors keeping them awake at night, you know how to architect your projects to actually get approved.
Because you cannot bypass bureaucratic friction if you don't understand the motivations of the people who are designing that friction.
Exactly. So let's start by analyzing that inherent conflict between the executives holding the data.
Right. You really have to look at it as the innovators versus the guardians. The Splunk and Kiteworks sources break this dichotomy down brilliantly.
Let's start with the innovators.
Okay, so first, you have the innovators, the chief information officer, the chief technology officer, and the chief data officer.
The CIO, CTO, and CDO.
Exactly. Their entire performance review is based on digital transformation. They are mandated to leverage data to increase velocity and operational agility.
Hang on, move fast.
Very fast. The CIO is optimizing the internal tech stack to eliminate friction. The CTO is pushing code to create stickier customer-facing products. And the CDO is tasked with extracting maximum monetization from the data lakes.
So for them, data is basically combustible fuel. It has to flow into the engine as fast as possible to generate horsepower.
That's the perfect analogy. But then you have the guardians. And the Chief Information Security Officer's entire philosophy, the CISO, is anchored in the CIA triad.
Confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Right. They are the protector of the corporate asset, whether it's defending against an advanced persistent threat, a ransomware syndicate, or just an accidental internal exposure. Their mandate is threat mitigation.
So if the innovators see data as fuel to be burned for speed, the CISO sees data as a toxic, highly volatile material that has to be contained in a reinforced, monitored vault.
Exactly. Their primary allegiance is purely to the protection of the corporate entity itself. They are guarding the balance sheet from fines, they're preventing reputational collapse, and ensuring operational continuity.
They're the brakes on the vehicle.
They are, but, and this is where it gets crazy, the conflict gets infinitely more complicated because the CISO is not the only guardian in the room.
Right, because you also have the data protection officer and the chief privacy officer.
Yeah, the DPO and the CPO. And their mandate isn't derived from corporate risk appetites, it's derived directly from international regulatory frameworks.
Like GDPR or PIA.
Exactly. They aren't playing the same game as the CISO at all.
And this brings us back to that German company find we started with, which is actually highlighted in a really fascinating IAPP article that was going around on a major cybersecurity forum. The CISO focuses on protecting the company's data, but the DPO focuses on protecting the data subject's privacy rights.
And that distinction is the bedrock of the entire tension.
I mean, I have to push back on the regulator's logic for a second here.
Okay, go for it.
If I'm a CISO and I am deploying zero-trust architecture, encrypting databases, enforcing strict access controls, I am simultaneously securing the company's IP and protecting the consumer's personal data.
Right, they overlap.
Yeah, security is security.
Yeah.
So regulating against a unified CISO and DPO role seems like total bureaucratic overreach. It's like giving someone a ticket for wearing a belt and suspenders. Why can't one highly skilled individual manage the entire defensive posture?
Well, you're viewing it through the lens of daily operations, where, yes, those interests completely align. But you have to view it through the lens of a catastrophic incident. It's not about the daily overlap, it's about the fundamental causality of their duties during a crisis. It's analogous to acting as both the prosecutor and the defense attorney in a high-stakes trial. You just can't do it.
Okay, walk me through a scenario where those duties actually shatter that alignment.
Sure. Let's say consider a zero-day exploit that breaches a massive customer database.
Worst case scenario.
Exactly. The CISO's immediate fiduciary instinct, and literally their job description, is to contain the blast radius, protect the stock price, patch the vulnerability, and conduct a tightly controlled, privileged internal investigation before making any public disclosures.
Because their priority is minimizing corporate damage.
Right. But the DPO, operating under GDPR or similar frameworks, has a stringent legal obligation to the human beings whose data was exfiltrated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The DPO's mandate might require them to notify regulatory authorities within an absolute 72-hour window and publicly advise the affected consumers to freeze their credit immediately.
Even if that immediate, transparent disclosure triggers a massive stock sell-off and immense reputational damage before the CISO has even fully patched the hole.
Precisely. In that exact moment of crisis, a single executive holding both titles is forced to choose between shielding the company from financial ruin or upholding the statutory privacy rights of the consumer.
And you can't do both.
The regulatory frameworks explicitly state you cannot impartially execute both duties. A DPO requires the structural independence to actively harm the company's immediate financial position if it is the only way to protect the individual's privacy.
That completely reframes the dynamic. It's not just a petty turf war over budget allocation. It is a legally mandated structural conflict of priorities.
It's baked into the system.
Yeah. The CIO pushes the data outward to generate revenue, the CSO locks the data down to preserve corporate continuity, and the DPO restricts data processing entirely to shield the consumer.
And, for decades, enterprises manage this inherent friction through physical siloing.
What do you mean?
Well, the data resided on bare metal servers in a controlled physical data center. The CIO managed the infrastructure. The CIO placed physical and digital firewalls around the perimeter, and the DPO just reviewed static access logs.
Ah, so it lacked agility, but it offered a highly stable governance environment.
Exactly. It was slow, but it was safe.
But according to the deep dive from PwC UK, that stability just evaporated. And the catalyst was cloud transformation.
Oh, absolutely.
Moving workloads to distributed environments didn't just modernize the tech stack, it acted as this massive structural stress test on these fragile executive truces.
Because the cloud completely dismantles the physical perimeter. There's no wall anymore.
Right. PwC notes that aggressive cloud migration initiatives frequently suffer from severe project delays and blown budgets entirely because the demand for agility and the requirement for privacy start pulling the architecture in opposite directions.
Yeah, it's a tug of war. From a CTO's perspective, the cloud is utopian. You bypass the 6-month procurement cycle for hardware. You just spin up containerized environments in AWS or Azure in seconds.
Yeah.
The velocity is incredible.
But for the Guardians, that velocity is terrifying.
Right.
You no longer have a literal wall. The data is traversing distributed networks, frequently hosted on third-party infrastructure, and accessible globally. The innovators are migrating petabytes of telemetry and customer data into sprawling data lakes to run advanced analytics.
And the Guardians are forced to slam the emergency brake because visibility just drops to zero. They completely lose track of data lineage.
The classic scenario is the CIO greenlighting a massive microservices architecture, getting to the final sprint before deployment, and then the DPO suddenly halting the entire pipeline.
Happens all the time.
Right. Because they discover the application processes biometric data for EU citizens, but the specific cloud instance is hosted in a jurisdiction that fails to meet GDPR adequacy standards. Millions of dollars in development time frozen because the governance frameworks weren't integrated into the CI/CD pipeline from day one.
Which forces us to examine the specific attack surface that cloud migration actually exposes. When the physical perimeter dissolves, the nature of the vulnerabilities shifts dramatically.
And before we map out the specific vectors of that attack surface, I really need to emphasize that securing these distributed environments is exactly the kind of complex problem set that platforms like CISOmarketplace.com are built to address.
Yeah, it's a critical tool.
It is a vital hub for security leaders actively sourcing solutions to the exact vulnerabilities we are dissecting right now.
And those vulnerabilities are incredibly nuanced. The research from PwC, combined with threat modeling from Reiko AI, outlines 6 severe data security threats in the modern enterprise. And the most prominent risk factor is actually the aggregation of sensitive data itself.
You mean the data lake problem?
Exactly. By centralizing disparate data silos into a massive cloud repository to train analytics models, you inadvertently construct the ultimate high-value target for a threat actor.
Because you are concentrating the risk.
Yeah. Previously, an attacker had to breach multiple isolated systems to exfiltrate financial records, customer PII, and proprietary source code.
It was a lot of work.
Right. Now, if they compromise the IAM controls governing that central data lake, they gain access to the entire corporate crown jewels in a single lateral movement. The efficiency gain in analytics is just mirrored by the efficiency given to the attacker.
Wow. But pooling the data is only half the issue, right? The way these distributed cloud environments communicate is inherently fragile. We really have to talk about cloud data exposure through misconfigured APIs.
This is a huge one.
And we aren't talking about sophisticated zero-day exploits here. We are talking about basic architectural hygiene.
Yeah, human error remains the largest vulnerability. I mean, in a microservices architecture, you rely on thousands of APIs constantly authenticating and passing data between applications.
Just constantly talking to each other.
Right. And a developer under pressure to meet a sprint deadline might inadvertently push an API configuration that lacks proper rate limiting or fails to enforce strict authentication tokens.
Or simply returns verbose error messages that expose underlying database structures.
Exactly. And it bypasses the entire perimeter defense strategy. You can deploy the most sophisticated web application firewalls on the market, but if an internal API is quietly exposing unauthenticated endpoints to the public internet, a threat actor doesn't need to hack you.
They just query the API and download the data lake.
Yep, they just ask for it and the system gives it to them. And that leads directly into the third major vulnerability highlighted by Reiko AI, which is third-party SaaS and shadow IT.
Oh, man.
This is the vector that causes CISOs the most sleepless nights.
Because it completely subverts the procurement and security review process. Imagine a scenario where a mid-level analyst needs to parse a massive JSON file of customer telemetry to present at a 3 p.m. strategy meeting. The improved enterprise tools are lagging. They're slow. So the analyst just goes out and finds a new browser-based parsing tool, uses a corporate card to expense a $5 premium tier, uploads the telemetry data, and generates the report,
They solved the business problem efficiently.
and simultaneously committed a catastrophic data breach.
Yep.
They just uploaded highly sensitive proprietary data to an unvetted, unauthorized third-party environment. The CISO has zero telemetry on that data movement. The DPO has no idea if that third-party vendor's terms of service allow them to utilize uploaded data to train their own internal models.
The enterprise has functionally inherited the entire risk profile of an unknown startup. If that SaaS vendor suffers a breach, your customer telemetry is exposed, and your organization holds the liability, despite the IT department never even provisioning the software.
It's terrifying.
It is. And this ties directly into the fourth vector, the evolution of insider threats.
Which is interesting because we tend to conceptualize insider threats as malicious actors, corporate espionage or disgruntled administrators detonating logic bombs.
Right, like something out of a movie.
Exactly.
Right.
But the reality is far more mundane and equally destructive.
It is the accidental misuse of elevated privileges. When data is heavily aggregated and access is distributed across cloud environments, a single compromised identity token can cause immense damage.
So an employee falls for an advanced spear phishing campaign that bypasses multi-factor authentication.
Or they accidentally misconfigure a storage bucket to public read access. The intent isn't malicious, but the outcome is identical to a nation-state breach.
Right. So if the physical perimeter is dead and the attack surface is this expansive, we've got aggregated data lakes, zombie APIs, shadow sauce sprawl, how do the Guardians actually execute a defense?
Well, the PwC research advocates for a strict data-centric mitigation philosophy.
Okay, what does that look like?
It requires a total paradigm shift. You must operate under the assumption that the network environment is already hostile and compromised.
Assume you're already breached.
Exactly. Therefore, the security controls must be intrinsically bound to the data payload itself. The data must remain entirely unreadable or useless to an unauthorized actor, regardless of where it resides or travels.
But that requires flawless execution of discovery and classification. You cannot implement data-centric controls if you lack visibility into your own environment.
Right, so you deploy automated posture management tools to continuously scan the cloud architecture, identifying and tagging sensitive data flows. You have to classify the risk.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
A publicly available marketing asset requires a vastly different security profile than an unencrypted database of employee health records.
Precisely. And once classified, the default instinct is pervasive encryption. Encrypt the data at rest within the storage volumes and encrypt it in transit via TLS as it moves between APIs.
But encryption alone creates massive operational friction, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, if a development team needs to stress test a new billing application, they cannot run those tests against encrypted ciphertext. They need functional data.
Right.
But if they decrypt the production database to populate the staging environment, they have just massively expanded the attack surface by placing real credit card numbers in a lower security testing tier.
Which introduces the critical necessity of data masking and anonymization. You have to implement dynamic data masking.
How does that work in practice?
You replace the sensitive production data with synthetic, structurally identical data. So the developer queries a credit card number, and the system returns a mathematically valid but entirely fabricated number.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, the application logic can be tested perfectly, but the actual PII never leaves the production vault. And anonymization takes this further by irreversibly stripping identifying markers from datasets, allowing the CDO to run massive analytics models without triggering GDPR compliance audits.
The crucial takeaway from the PwC analysis is that dynamic masking, encryption key management, and continuous discovery cannot be bolted onto the architecture post-deployment. They have to be natively embedded into the CI/CD pipeline.
And you cannot achieve that native integration if the CIO, the CISO, and the DPO are operating in silos.
The technical vulnerabilities force an administrative reckoning. The executives have to stop fighting over the turf and actually integrate their governance models.
Yeah, we are seeing massive structural changes in how these organizations are governed. The Ethisphere framework, which we sourced via Scribd, introduces a highly effective approach, the three-pillar governance model.
The three-pillar model. Okay.
It advocates for the deep integration of the Chief Compliance Officer, the CCO with the CISO, and the DPO.
The inclusion of the CCO is vital there. While the DPO is hyper-focused on statutory data privacy, the CCO manages the broader ethical and regulatory posture of the entire enterprise. They function as the guardian of governance.
Right, but the Ethisphere document specifically frames the modern CCO as a change agent, which completely subverts the traditional view of compliance as an internal police force relying on punitive measures.
Because a punitive approach simply drives shadow IT deeper underground.
Exactly. If compliance is just an annual mandatory training video that employees click through as fast as possible while they're eating lunch, it provides zero actual security.
Yeah.
So the modern CCO deploys ambassador programs. They embed compliance champions deep within the operational units, sales, marketing, DevOps.
So they're physically in the room.
Yeah, these champions advocate for ethical data handling and privacy by design from within the engineering sprints themselves.
They are re-engineering the corporate culture. They want the analyst who is tempted to use an unvetted SaaS tool to inherently understand the cascading risk of that action, rather than just fearing a reprimand from IT.
When you fuse the cultural engineering of the CCO with the cryptographic security of the CISO and the regulatory oversight of the DPO, you create an incredibly resilient defensive architecture.
But an enterprise cannot survive on defense alone.
No, it can't.
The vehicle still has to move forward. And that brings us to the Forbes analysis, which introduces a highly aggressive, integrated concept known as the Growth Alliance. Forbes argues for the chief marketing officer to form a strategic triad with the CISO and the CPO.
This is the critical moment where the innovators and the guardians actually align their mandates toward revenue generation.
I like to think of a modern enterprise as a complex, highly engineered system, right? Like a high-speed rail network.
Okay, check.
The CMO is the locomotive. Their entire purpose is to generate momentum, expand into new territories, and drive the business forward at maximum velocity.
But velocity without architectural integrity is just a derailment waiting to happen.
Exactly. So the CISO provides the advanced braking systems and the track switching logic. And they don't build the brakes to stop the train. They build the brakes so the train can safely achieve higher top speeds without flying off the rails on a sharp curve.
That makes total sense.
Superior security actually enables greater operational velocity.
And the chief privacy officer operates as the central dispatch and routing authority. They ensure the network is operating within the legal jurisdictions, preventing the enterprise from routing data through prohibited territories that would trigger massive regulatory fines and shut down the entire line.
It requires all three components operating in perfect sync. The SE Media analysis points out that this growth alliance represents a monumental shift in corporate psychology. Historically, the boardroom viewed security and compliance as a sunk cost.
Yeah.
Just a mandatory tax on operations.
Yeah, a cost center. But the Growth Alliance weaponizes security as a market differentiator. SC Media defines this as building trust literacy.
Trust literacy.
Yeah. If your CMO can go to the enterprise market and demonstrate that your product not only delivers superior analytics, but also utilizes zero-knowledge encryption and mathematically guarantees GDPR compliance, that verifiable trust actively closes enterprise deals. The security posture becomes a core revenue driver.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have the architecture aligned. The cloud environments are discovering and masking data natively. The C-suite is operating as a unified growth alliance. The friction is seemingly resolved.
Until the foundational technology shifts again.
Right. Generative and agentic artificial intelligence enters the environment and completely obliterates the established governance models.
Because everything we just discussed regarding cloud security, data masking, and executive alignment, that was all engineered for a deterministic world. It was built for static databases and predictable application logic.
But AI is inherently probabilistic.
Exactly.
And before we unpack the absolute chaos AI is unleashing in the boardroom, I really want to emphasize that adapting to this specific disruption is why platforms like ComplianceHub.wiki are non-negotiable for enterprise leaders.
They really are.
Tracking the daily permutations of global AI frameworks and privacy regulations requires a dedicated intelligence hub. You can't just wing it.
No, the risk equation has fundamentally changed, and the regulatory bodies are scrambling to keep up.
And that scramble is mirrored internally. We are seeing a fierce debate erupt in the executive ranks, heavily documented in the case studies from Fortune Partners and the insights from the DPO Center. We have a new title emerging, the CAIO, the Chief AI Officer.
The newest variable in the C-suite equation.
Now, I have to challenge this trend. Does an enterprise legitimately require another C-level title?
That's a fair question.
The IntelliWorks source highlights that even within massive federal deployments, the boundary lines between the CIO, the CDO, and this newly minted CAIO are disastrously blurred.
Yeah, they're stepping on each other's toes.
The CIO claims jurisdiction because AI is essentially compute infrastructure. The CDO claims jurisdiction because AI models are entirely dependent on the data pipelines. Is the CIO just a vanity title for a glorified project manager?
Well, the debate over the specific title misses the core utility of the role. You create a CIO, or you explicitly expand the mandate of a highly technical CDO because the risk profile of generative models is unprecedented.
So,
Traditional software takes input A and reliably produces output B every time. An LLM takes input A and might produce output B. Or it might hallucinate a highly plausible, entirely fabricated legal citation that causes massive reputational damage. Or it might subtly shift its outputs over time due to model drift.
right, you just don't know for sure.
Exactly. So the fundamental takeaway from the Fortune Partners analysis is the desperate need for centralized executive accountability.
You need a single throat to choke when the deployment goes sideways.
Brutal, but yes. If the ownership of an AI initiative is fractured across engineering, data science, and legal, you have zero true accountability.
Right.
When a customer service chatbot hallucinates a refund policy, or an automated resume screener begins aggressively filtering out candidates based on inferred demographic data, the departments will just point fingers at one another. Without a dedicated executive owner possessing the authority to halt deployments, enterprise AI initiatives degenerate into unmanageable liabilities.
The sources from Oracle and Big I pivot this concept toward an AI shared responsibility model. They argue that regardless of the CIO title, the critical nexus of failure or success lies directly between the Chief Data Officer and the CISO. Why is that specific relationship the ultimate bottleneck?
Because the vulnerabilities introduced by AI bypass the traditional controls of both domains. I mean, we discussed the nightmare of shadow saws earlier. AI introduces shadow AI, which is exponentially more dangerous.
Oh man, like engineers feeding proprietary algorithms into a public LLM to optimize their code, completely unaware that the model is absorbing their intellectual property.
Exactly. And the CISO is tasked with detecting and mitigating that shadow usage, usually by deploying advanced DLP controls and provisioning secure, walled-off enterprise instances of these models.
But the deeper and more complex risks reside in the training data itself, right?
Yes. Say the CDO wants to fine-tune an open-source model on the company's historical loan approval data to automate future processing. If that historical data contains systemic latent biases regarding zip codes or income brackets, the AI will not only learn those biases, it will mathematically institutionalize them at scale.
So the enterprise goes from a human error problem to automated algorithmic discrimination, just inviting massive class action litigation.
Furthermore, you have the threat of LLM data leakage and model inversion attacks.
What are those?
If an employee queries an internal, fine-tuned model with highly specific prompts, the model might inadvertently regurgitate the exact PII or trade secrets it was trained on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the CDO is focused on the model's accuracy. The CSO has to ensure the model doesn't become a massive conversational data exfiltration vector. They have to collaboratively architect strict boundary logic and implement rigorous output filtering.
Grasping the sheer scale of the probabilistic risk is paralyzing. Like, if you are an enterprise without a dedicated army of machine learning ethicists and specialized legal counsel, how do you practically deploy these systems? How do you govern a technology that writes its own rules?
It requires an incredibly aggressive, highly structured governance sprint. And this is exactly what the Fortune Partners case study titled Ungoverned to Operational maps out.
Right, the 6-month blueprint.
Yes. It proves that a comprehensive, compliant AI governance posture can be engineered from scratch in just 6 months by deploying a fractional CIO.
It's an intense operational cadence. The Fortune case study details a 5-phase architectural blueprint, and I really want to dive deep into the specific artifacts they produced. First, the foundational anchors.
Essential step.
They avoided the trap of writing bespoke internal policies. They anchor the entire governance structure directly to ISO IEs 42001.2023 and the NIST AI Risk Management Framework.
Which is the most strategic move an organization can make. ISO 42001 operates as the definitive global standard for AI management systems. It provides the rigid, auditable architecture for how governance must be structured.
And NIST.
The NIST framework offers a highly flexible operational playbook for mapping, measuring, and managing the specific risks inherent to the models. By fusing these two frameworks, the enterprise instantly inherits global best practices and creates a defensible posture for future regulatory audits.
Okay, the second major artifact addresses the accountability vacuum we discussed earlier. They built a highly detailed RACI matrix for the entire AI lifecycle
But it's crucial to understand that a RACI matrix for AI is vastly more complex than one used for standard software development.
because of the probabilistic nature.
Exactly. You are defining who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for probabilistic outcomes. Who is specifically responsible for conducting the pre-deployment bias audits, the data science lead. Who holds ultimate accountability if the model violates copyright law? The executive sponsor or the CAIO? Who must be consulted to review the training data provenance? The legal department and the CPO.
So it physically codifies the rules of engagement. You eliminate the turf war because every operational boundary is documented and signed off on before the first line of code is committed.
Exactly. Now, the third artifact is arguably the most critical for regulatory survival, a three-tier risk classification architecture and a comprehensive AI system inventory. The Forsham study explicitly mapped this to the requirements of the EU AI Act.
Why is a centralized inventory the linchpin of the strategy?
It mirrors the logic of cloud data discovery. You cannot govern shadow models. The inventory serves as the single source of truth for every machine learning model, third-party AI tool, and autonomous agent operating within the corporate boundary.
Including the embedded AI tools inside existing SaaS platforms that suddenly get activated by vendor updates?
Exactly those. That's a huge blind spot. And the three-tier classification system aggressively triages them based on risk.
Give me some examples of the tiers.
Sure. A generative model drafting internal marketing copy is classified as low risk. A predictive model analyzing employee communication patterns to determine termination risks is classified as high risk, triggering immediate stringent oversight.
That makes sense.
And a system making autonomous decisions regarding physical safety systems would be classified as unacceptable risk and halted immediately. This triage allows the governance team to allocate their finite auditing resources exclusively to the high-impact deployments.
It also provides a transferable compliance template. Instead of attempting to parse the subtle differences between emerging laws in Colorado, Texas, and the EU, the governance team maintains a unified inventory that maps to the strictest common denominator, satisfying multiple regulatory bodies simultaneously.
That's the beauty of it. Now, the fourth artifact in the blueprint requires a total overhaul of the procurement lifecycle. Enhanced vendor security.
Because auditing an AI vendor is fundamentally different from auditing a traditional cloud provider.
Traditionally, vendor risk management focused on the architecture. Do you have SOC2 Type 2 compliance? Are your databases encrypted? Do you perform annual penetration testing?
Standard stuff.
Right. But when procuring an AI platform, you must interrogate the model itself. What specific datasets were ingested during the training phase? Can you mathematically prove you hold the copyright licenses for that ingestion? Has the model been red-teamed against prompt injection attacks?
You aren't just auditing their perimeter defenses, you are auditing the algorithmic diet and the cognitive hygiene of the model.
Yes.
If an enterprise integrates a vendor's LLM, and it turns out that model was trained on scraped copyrighted material, the enterprise utilizing the outputs inherits that legal liability.
It's a massive risk transfer. The final artifact of the Fortune Blueprint ensures the longevity of the program. They established an internal center of excellence.
So they didn't just build the frameworks and leave.
No, they aggressively upskilled the internal engineering and compliance teams to manage the lifecycle, eliminating the permanent reliance on expensive external consultancies.
The governance protocols become embedded in the organizational muscle memory.
Exactly.
Now, to provide a comprehensive view, we also analyzed alternative frameworks from our sources that complement or challenge the Forsham approach.
Because different operational environments require tailored governance models, there is no monolithic solution.
Right. The Fisher-Phillips 10-step guide is a perfect example. Because it originates from a legal perspective, it heavily indexes on liability mitigation. It mandates rigorous third-party bias auditing and enforces mandatory annual employee training specifically focused on acceptable AI usage.
It's a highly defensive posture. If a rogue employee utilizes an unapproved generative tool to write a discriminatory policy, the enterprise can leverage those mandatory training logs in court to demonstrate they exercised reasonable care to prevent the misuse.
Then we have the framework proposed by This Is ORG, which focuses on a rigid, gated deployment process.
Yeah, the gated architecture ensures that an AI initiative cannot transition from a conceptual sandbox to a funded production deployment without successfully clearing distinct governance checkpoints.
They have to prove themselves at every step.
The model must empirically prove its security posture, ethical alignment, and ROI at each specific gate. They also heavily emphasize a structured build versus buy decision matrix.
forcing executives to critically evaluate the compute costs and data leakage risks of fine-tuning an open-source model internally versus the financial efficiency of utilizing a heavily vetted, off-the-shelf enterprise API.
Exactly. Finally, the joint case study detailing the implementations at Banco Bradesco and TELUS offers a highly mature architectural view. They advocate for the strict separation of strategic and operational governance layers, and critically, the direct embedding of human rights safeguards into the model evaluation.
The separation of layers is brilliant. The Strategic Steering Committee defines the macro risk appetite and the ethical boundaries. The Operational Committee executes the granular audits on specific models.
Right, and by decoupling them, you prevent a scenario where the engineers auditing a model are pressured to ignore safety anomalies just to ensure the company hits a strategic revenue target.
It keeps them honest. And embedding human rights safeguards requires the testing teams to explicitly evaluate whether the model's outputs could inadvertently cause psychological harm, facilitate surveillance, or violate fundamental privacy expectations. It moves ethics from a philosophical discussion to a measurable engineering requirement.
Which is where it needs to be.
So, we have dissected these massive frameworks, but let's shift to the inevitable reality. The regulatory grace period is ending.
Oh, it's over.
When the auditors from the EU AI office or the enforcement arms in various states actually initiate an investigation, what specific artifacts are they demanding to see?
The era of issuing broad, performative corporate statements about responsible AI is completely over. We are entering the phase of rigorous enforcement. Based on the regulatory trajectories, artifacts like the Dynamic AI System Inventory, the OCI matrices, and the documented bias audits will transition from being considered operational best practices to being mandatory, heavily scrutinized evidentiary requirements.
If a regulator initiates a compliance audit and you just present them with a 2-page ethical manifesto,
You will face immediate, crippling fines. The auditors will demand access to the centralized repository detailing every active model. They will demand the risk classifications, the data lineage documentation for the training pipelines, and the physical intake forms where the CISO and the CCO authorize the deployment.
they want the receipts.
They want all the receipts. The Fortune case study doesn't just outline a best practice, it outlines the absolute minimum evidentiary baseline required to demonstrate governance intent to a hostile examiner. If you lack that paper trail, you are legally indefensible.
That is a chilling reality check for enterprise leadership. We have navigated through an immense amount of architectural and regulatory complexity today. We've decoded the structural C-suite conflicts, the vulnerabilities of cloud migration, the necessity of the Growth Alliance, and the intense operational blueprints required for AI compliance. But I want to pull this massive theoretical discussion down to the absolute ground floor.
Let's translate this into the daily workflow of the individual contributor.
Exactly. If you are listening to this right now, whether you are a DevOps engineer configuring a new cloud instance, a procurement officer reviewing a vendor contract, or a marketing analyst trying to summarize a campaign utilizing an AI agent, you are an active, critical participant in this entire governance ecosystem.
You are standing on the front lines of this turf war.
Every operational decision you make either reinforces the enterprise architecture or punches a new hole in the perimeter.
Synthesizing the core philosophies from PwC, Kiteworks, and the AI Governance Institute, what is the single most actionable directive for the listener navigating this environment tomorrow morning?
Yeah, what's the takeaway?
You must ruthlessly apply the principle of purpose limitation to your daily workflows.
Break down the mechanics of purpose limitation in practice for us.
It is the foundational pillar of data privacy. It dictates that you only extract, process, and transmit the absolute minimum amount of data required to execute a specific function. If you are running a regional performance analysis, you do not pull the global database encompassing full customer histories and financial routing numbers. You query only the aggregated, anonymized metrics necessary for the report.
You deliberately restrict your own access to minimize the potential blast radius if your account is compromised.
You never request elevated permissions unless operationally vital. You never attach raw data files to external communications if a synthesized summary suffices. And most critically, in the current landscape, you must operate with extreme prejudice regarding shadow AI.
Do not bypass the procurement process just because a browser-based tool promises a 10-second solution to a 2-hour problem.
Before you paste a block of proprietary code into a conversational agent to hunt for a syntax error, or before you upload a client briefing to generate an executive summary, you must verify the environment.
You have to pause.
Yes. Is this a sanctioned, zero retention enterprise deployment? Or is this a public model that will ingest, retain, and potentially expose your intellectual property? If you cannot definitively answer that question, you halt the workflow, you escalate to the CISO's team.
Because the guardians exist to create friction. But that friction is the only thing preventing a catastrophic derailment of your career and the company's future.
You are an integral node in the Growth Alliance.
That is a phenomenal framing. Before we close, I want to express our final gratitude to CISOmarketplace.com and ComplianceHub.wiki. Distilling these massive, highly technical enterprise frameworks into accessible, strategic intelligence is a monumental effort, and it is entirely supported by their commitment to advancing the industry's knowledge base.
Their resources are essential for anyone operating in this space.
Let's review the trajectory of this deep dive. We initiated by exposing the structural, legally mandated conflicts embedded within the C-suite, the innovators driving velocity, colliding with the CISO guarding the infrastructure, and the DPO shielding the consumer.
We analyzed how the dissolution of the physical perimeter during cloud migration magnified those tensions, forcing a critical pivot from network-based defenses to data-centric cryptography and masking.
We examined the architectural solutions, specifically the three-pillar integration of the CCO and the strategic alignment of the Growth Alliance, transforming security into a measurable market advantage.
And we confronted the paradigm-shattering reality of generative models. We debated the necessity of the CAIO, the complexities of shared executive responsibility, and deeply analyzed a proven 6-month blueprint for moving from theoretical risk to a fully operational, auditable AI governance architecture.
It has been an incredibly dense, rewarding exploration. But before we sign off, I want to pivot to the horizon. We spent this entire time analyzing how human executives are desperately attempting to construct frameworks to govern these technologies. Based on the velocity of these models, where does this architecture inevitably lead?
If you extrapolate the current development curves, we are rapidly transitioning away from purely generative model systems that passively wait for human prompts toward highly autonomous agentic AI.
Right.
We are building systems capable of chained reasoning and independent execution. In the near future, these enterprise agents will independently negotiate API access, procure their own required compute resources, and execute complex data sharing agreements with other autonomous agents across disparate corporate boundaries.
An entire shadow economy of machine-to-machine transactions operating at speeds that totally defy human oversight.
Precisely. The complexity and velocity of those operations will instantaneously overwhelm any human governance committee. So the ultimate provocation is this. As these networks become fully autonomous, the human CISO and the human CCO will be structurally incapable of auditing the workflows in real time. Will the enterprise be forced to engineer an AI CIs?
An artificial intelligence explicitly architected, trained, and deployed for the sole purpose of policing other artificial intelligences.
An apex predator model whose only function is to continuously monitor, cryptographically verify, and instantly terminate the actions of internal AI agents that drift outside the defined risk parameters.
That is intense.
It essentially removes the human executive from the operational governance loop entirely, shifting humans to purely strategic oversight. We are currently battling over C-suite titles and reporting structures, but within a decade, the entities holding those titles may not be human at all.
That is an absolutely staggering concept. The alphabet soup of the boardroom ultimately compiling down into self-policing algorithmic architecture.
It is the inevitable conclusion of the technological arms race.
I highly encourage you, the listener, to carry these strategies back to your own teams. Interrogate your AI inventory. Enforce strict purpose limitation in your daily operations. We wish you the absolute best in navigating your data architecture, securing your expanding attack surface, and maintaining the delicate balance of your enterprise frameworks. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.